So continuing to our integration journey, the next integration which comes on our way is the core connectors. Core connectors is the part of the Cloud Connect integrations which Workday has given, configurable integrations which we are creating in Workday using Workday services. Now, on top of the current integrations which we have already discussed, REST as an API, web services, and then EIB. So this is in continuation to those integrations, which has its own pros and cons and the advancement over the previous integrations which we have learned. So as maybe mentioned a couple of times before, when we were discussing the Delta file and the full file runs. So this integration is actually given by Workday to detect the changes. So although it can also support the full file runs, but the main motive of this integration is to have a inbuilt integration connector given by Workday to detect the changes on its own, because Delta file requirements is very common, and until now we didn't have any such integration which can detect changes by Workday. There was only one way that we discussed was about the custom change detection that we'll have to achieve using the calculated fields, but that was also not very good considering the lot of field data that you have, data sets, and considering the bigger the organization. So the time changes and all, that was not up to the mark, so you could not use those integrations. So this integration comes into picture, which gives you the ability to detect changes on its own by configuring some things. And this integration works on the base of templates. So when we call as templates, so similar like the EIB inbound templates that we have worked on, EIB inbound templates were working on the idea of business processes which were used as web services to perform some data updates. Similarly, Core Connectors works on the behind the scenes works on the web services basis, wherein each connector template that we create kind of uses web services in the background, which actually works and gives you the data. Now, connector works in a little different way. Web services you can also use, just like we have discussed, using the core connector, using the get workers web services to get you the output, wherein you don't have to create the integrations on your own. But that also being used for some cases. But core connector also uses the same web service get workers, but it kind of do a heavy lifting on its own, wherein it kind of runs the same get workers web service twice and then kind of compares the extract from the last run to the current run, and then gives the difference of data to you by saying, okay, that this data has been changed from this to this from the last run. But when you run the get workers web service, you have to build a very complex scenario to run that web service twice with two times different launch parameters. So that's why we don't achieve that much of a good change detection when we are running the web service on its own. But Core Connector does that for you, where it in the behind the scenes it runs the web service, but runs twice and gives you the extract comparison behind the scenes and gives you what the data is needed. So it has some services which we call them as configurable services. It has some attributes. It has some data mappings which you map the fields, what you want. It has some override options. So it's like all configurable things that you do with the core connector, which the things which you need. It has a lot of control over the transactions which you want to be outputted. If you don't want workers to be outputted from certain transactions, then you can do that. If you want to exclude certain transactions, if you want to include certain transactions, you can do that. So by the virtue of which only the transactions which you want actually to be there by which the workers, if undergo any change, then only your workers will be picked up for a change or whatever attribute other than the worker that you are using. So if we go here on creating this integration, how do you create this integration? I'm thinking that not to create, maybe we'll just use the existing one, but I'll just show you the process to create. So you use the integration system, create integration system task. So create instances, and then you choose this task, create integration. So this task we have used for the first time. For the EIB, there is a different task. For report, there was a different task. To create the integration system, it is a different task. But EIB is also integration. This is also integration. They are both searchable by the intsys keyword, but the tasks to create these integrations are different. So to create a core connector, we use create integration system.
Oh, sorry. Can you remind me what was the task for EIB?
Create EIB. Simple.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. So you just give the integration whatever name you wish to. And then in the template, here is where you are going to choose the template, that what are you going to work? What is that you want to expose the data outside? What is that you want to achieve with this integration? So you choose the templates. So in our case, let's say if we want to choose worker, so I'll just type worker in here. So with worker, you will see a lot of other templates as well. This is called as worker effective change interface. You have worker payroll input async, worker time block inbound to update the. So this also works on the inbound basis as well. So some of these templates also support the inbound nature, wherein it has a default template fixed, but it is a little more advanced than your EIB. And then it can also update the data for you. So majority we use this for outbound. So here is our template that we were going to use, core connector worker. And if you will hear or you will have heard of the payroll integrations, which are supporting your third-party payroll. If you are not using Workday payroll and you're using some other payroll like ADP, Accessibility or something else, and you need to send the payroll data outside. So your payroll integrations, it could be either could either be a payroll, which we call it as PCOF, payroll interface, or it could be a PG, which we call it as payroll effective change interface. So this one, payroll effective change interface, it's kind of the latest one, which is more advanced. And the payroll interface, which is called as PCOF, that is the later one. But this is not used anymore in the sense that Workday does not recommend to create payroll interface anymore, and Workday kind of wants you to create new integrations with payroll effective change interface only. But they do support the existing payroll interface connector as well, because this is an inbuilt connector given by Workday. So if there are any delivered issues coming into this connector, Workday will support this. But for the new integrations, Workday does not support the new integration with this one. So these will be two templates that will be used for your payroll data outbound. So they have some advancement over one another. Both of them, this kind of gives only the top of the stack data to you. But this integration is capable, payroll effective and change interface is capable of giving you the incremental data as well. So if there was a change from the last run until now, and there were multiple changes, layered changes, so it will also give you those layered changes to you. So it has also a capability to pick up the incremental changes. So one of the difference between these two integrations, there are other differences as well. So this one needs the grid enablement. So there's a feature called grid enablement in your tenant, where you enable grids in your tenant. So it's kind of, for this interface to work, your tenant should be grid enabled. If you don't have your tenant grid enabled, then and you cannot use this. And grid enablement actually costs you. The more the tenant that you want to grid enable, Workday has to provide additional support, because when you use these kind of connectors, it kind of put a lot of load on your Workday instance, and the Workday instance might become slow, because when these interfaces are running, they consume a lot of bandwidth and resources from your system to have those data available to you by comparing so many extracts and so on. So these are some features so this also comes with the same core connector only. It's just that the way of choosing the templates, what templates that you choose. So if I just choose as for our case, we'll choose the core connector worker. So this is our template. So now there's a lot of community information available. If you see how the core connector works, there's a detailed information which web services this connector to use, what is the working principle of. So almost every template is detailed described on Workday community, that what this template does, where should you use these templates and all. So you just choose your template and you click OK, and then you will be on your integration. So let me create a new one only, otherwise.
Should we just use Workday delivered templates, or can we create our own core connector templates?
You cannot create your own templates. It's like you have to only use the templates which are given by Workday for your different kind of requirements. Let's say you have a requirement to send the job profile data. You can choose the template as job profile. If you have the requirement for position, organizations. So based on the different, if you can say majority, let's say a different business object data that you want to send. So it's not exactly business object, it's more than that. But if you just want to understand in that way, that if you want to use this connector for job profile data, for any kind of metadata organizational, then you can do that as well. But you cannot create your own template. It only supports the templates which works on the pre-existing basis. So you give some good name to it. Usually we kind of name it like CCW if it's worker. If it's organization, you call it as CCO. If it's coordinator position, job profile. So different nomenclature, different systems. CCW. You give it some name, you choose your template, and then you click OK. Then you will be inside the configuration of your connector now. So the first screen that you would see here is configure integration services. So services, choosing the services, it's like you are choosing your, what's the exact for that? You're choosing subscriptions kind of that. What is the facility? What are the features that you want to use from this core connector, which is on opt-in basis? Some of the features which are bare minimum and required by the connector as by default, those are already enabled and you cannot remove them. So in the blue gray areas, you will see that the ones which are already enabled, that means these are the services which are by default needed by the core connector to support the bare minimum operations. Other services which you see here as optional in here and which are available for you to choose or not choose. So these are the on top services which you can choose based on your need. The ones which are here by default, which will be needed by the core connector anyways. If you want to enable all the services, you can do it at once. If you want to go it one by one based on your needs, you can. So the more the services you choose, the more the load is there going to be on your worker. This connector integration, you'll have to choose what you need, what you don't need. So based on the services you need, the rest of the integrations will be available for you to configure. If you choose one service, then what that service gives you, you'll be able to configure it in the next stages. So the things will be controlled from a source point here itself. The service you choose, then later on, you'll be able to do a lot of things from the service itself. It's like a subscription that you are choosing. If you do not have this service subscription, you'll not be able to do things later on, which are required by this service or which were part of this service. So some of these are default that we choose. Initialization of the worker, launch parameter services, which enables you to enter the launch parameters. What was the last successful run? What is the current run? What is the effective date? Those are the things. The mapping service of the core connector, that means it kind of offers you to map some fields. We'll discuss this. It is kind of equal to creating evaluation calc field, wherein instead of sending gender value to male, you can send the value to M. Instead of sending the marital status from married USA to MS or MUSA, you can do that. So some of the fields which are there in Workday are supported for this mapping. So these are the basic services which are needed, like mapping services, the eligibility services. It's like a filter and so many things. So these are some ones which will just keep it enabled. The rest of the services, some of which will is part of the discussion, we will opt them out. So worker transaction log service. So this transaction log service is not by default enabled, but if you want this service to be enabled, it gives you the details on the transaction log. What is the transaction logs happening inside Workday? If you want to have a control over those transactions, what transactions to be filtered, what transactions not to be filtered. If I only want workers to be coming, if they are having any changes due to these transactions. So all those permutations and combinations you can learn from using the transaction log service. If you do not enable this transaction log service, then Workday would assume that you have opted for all the transactions by default. That means any change which is happening to any transaction or business process in Workday, that will be part of your category, that will be part of the eligibility for the worker to be picked up for the change. Similarly, you have sequence file generator. So we discussed this in the EIB, that we have to create a separate, you have to use a separate task, then create a placeholder for your sequence generator, and then you call and configure that sequence generator in EIB. But here, it's just a service that you have to choose. If you just choose it, then Workday will in-house give you the facility to just configure the same exact thing that you configured in your EIB, but via a different task as a different object. But here it is in-house and inbuilt in this connector. Some way other the round you will learn and will do that, you'll have an option to configure the sequence generator. But for that, you have to opt for the service. If you want to have such options to send by default, the Workday, this connector sends the file as in XML format as the default format of Workday. But if you want the CSV options, you can enable this service. Document retention service, for how many days you want to retain the document on your integration. If you want to send the profile photo of worker. So from after the document retention, there will be data service starting from here. So you choose the data service as and when and what you require from the Workday. That means if you have a requirement of 10 fields, so of course, first of all, if you're creating the connector for the first time, even if you're creating multiple times, you would not know which field because in the first option, you will not see the exact fields what you are trying to report in your connector. What is the need of your output? The data is divided into different sections. Just like for photo, there is a totally different section because photo is not needed. Very rarely photo service is needed. But if you want the photo service, you can check this. The sections, if you see here, the data is divided into different sections. So some of the fields are lying into personal data section. Some of the fields are lying in worker status data section, position data section, contract data, leave of absence data, compensation data. So different sections are divided. Workday data is divided into different sections. And if you choose for whatever section you need, so in the first time you might not know. So just randomly select whatever is your first guess to choose the sections. And then when later on we will configure these sections, you will see if the field that you need to report in your output file, if it is there in the particular section, it's okay. If you see that your field is not there in the sections that you have chosen, then you can come again here, configure the more service, any other than that you have left, then see if that service is supporting your data. And then when you realize, okay, that this service is supporting my data, then the recommendation is that whatever the sections which you are not using, the services which you are not using, better to not use them, so that your data section would be crisp and clear. And Workday also does not put any additional load by choosing these services in your section. If you're not using not even a single field even if you're using a single field from the section, then it would make sense to have it. So depending on the different fields that you want, you just choose. So I'm assuming the personal data section I would definitely need. Maybe position data section as well I would need, at least for the demographic data. And then If you want to send leave of absence data, compensation data, identification, related personal data, dependent details, or so on, then you can choose all these details. If you want detailed level of details on the transaction, what transaction happened and all, then you can choose the transaction. So this is all about the data section, what data you want to get outputted in your core connector. So you choose these services based on your data that you need. Now, as in the report we had, so all the delivered fields that you have will be covered in your sectional services. But what if you have a need to send any field which is not delivered by Workday? Just like in the reports, we had an option to create calculated fields. So we could create these calculated fields and just use it. So this connector also supports creation of the calculated fields, but it is not available in the delivered field section. So what additional we need to do here? You have to create an additional service. So here you see, these are the delivered Workday services, and below you will see custom integration services. So these are the custom integration services which Workday provides. And apart in this section, we will use one of the custom integration services, which is called as field override service. So we use the field override service, which will support the additional calculated fields that we want that is not part of my delivered data section. So you create a plus here, and then you come here in this section, integration services, you click on create, and then you choose the integration field override service. When you click on this, it will take you to the next screen. So whatever the name of your connector is, you will just name the similar with similar configuration, similar naming conventions. So usually we call that FO, field overrides, but depends on what naming convention. You can just call it whatever you want. Field override. So since you are creating a field override service, Workday wants you to ask you the business object which you want to use. So since your connector is kind of get worker connector that you are using, so the fields that will be supported by this connector will be on the worker business object only. So you'll have to choose your business object, because the calculated fields that you will be creating should be on your worker business object. Then only those calculated fields will be supported by this connector. So that's why it asks you to choose your business object. So once you have chosen your business object, in here, calculated fields you will have to create outside. Connector will not support creation of calculated fields, but you can create the calculated fields outside and then you will use it. We'll discuss how we can use it, but then you will use it. This is a skeleton placeholder for the field override service that you are creating. So here you will just give the name.
Is it the calculated fields that we create for report? Is it like same as that one?
Correct. Same.
System-wide global calculated and
global calculated field. Yes.
right. Okay.
So here you just give the skeleton field name. It's like whatever this would be called by the name. So in your final output file, this would be the name by which this field would be shown. We'll configure it later, but this is the skeleton which you want to give it the name. You can create as many calculated fields you want, but Workday's recommendation is that you should not create calculated fields over 20. If it is over 20, then you'll have to justify. Sometimes the fields are available by default from the sectional services, but still people don't choose those fields and unnecessarily create calculated fields. So recommendation is that if you have fields, if you're going for an implementation project and if your field count, override field count is over 20, then you'll have to give a justification that why you are creating these many fields, why your requirement is not met. So just a review needs to happen. Otherwise, you can create as many fields as you want. No technical limitation, but just a recommendation.
When we create calculated fields, how are we attaching here and create integration field override service?
Correct. So
if it is, let's say,
So
let's say
there
we have a global calculated field, and how do we get that calculated field in here?
you will do it. It is just, I'm saying, it is just a placeholder and a skeleton wherein you are just defining what your field name would be and how many field names you're going to define.
Oh, okay. Got
Whatever
it.
you have, just create a plus plus, give it a name. If you want to give it a description, give it a description. Otherwise, just click OK. So this, and in the below sections, you will be able to see your override service created here. Now we will click OK. The services section is over and we are able to create a service. As soon as I chose the service, I started getting this error. Now, as and when you choose this service, there is this default error going to come. Let's click on this. So it will tell you that there are some integration attributes enabled for this integration system that are marked as required to launch your integration, but they do not have any value assigned to them. It also gives you the path where you will go and do this. So when you save the integration, you kind of starts getting this error because there is a mandatory parameter called as version of this core connector, because based on the version, Workday will be able to support that what features would be supported in this. So that parameter is kind of a mandatory one, based on which you will decide further that how your integration would behave, what is the version your integration is in. So it kind of resembles with the versions Workday provides, just like version 40, 39, 38. So latest is version 40. So you start giving this error, and that is when our next step would be immediately after configuring the services, we will go and configure the integration attributes. So you'll hear two kind of similar things: integration attributes and integration field attributes. So in the below, if you see integration field attributes and integration attributes and integration field attributes. So integration attributes are defined on the integration level, which kind of controls your entire integration, how your integration would behave, what your integration would contain, what your integration will not contain. Attributes also control your field attributes, that what you choose in your attributes that might control the field attributes. That means the field attributes is the actual data. So the services in the data section that you have chosen, you will configure the field attributes using those same services later, that each section will have the set of data. You will check them what you want. So integration attributes will kind of control your data as well, how your field would look like and what your field would be. But choosing the exact fields to be in the output or not, that will be decided by field attributes. That will be the next step after the integration attributes. So first of all, we'll go to the integration attributes. So here you will see a lot of integration attributes, and they are quite descriptive as well here. What attribute, what it does and all. So if you just go by the first one, output file name. So what this attribute does, assigns the name to the output file. If you enable the file name sequence generator, leave this value empty. Otherwise, it must be populated with a file name. So it wants you to provide an output file name to your integration. If you're using a sequence generator in your integration, then you can leave it empty. But if you're not using the sequence generator in your output file, it will give you error. So we have chosen the sequence generator service, so we can keep it empty. But if you're not choosing a sequence generator, then your integration would need a file name, right? So then you'll have to come here, create a plus, and give your default file name, what you want your file name to be. So it's on the integration level that you are controlling this attribute. So the error that we have got, that we need to configure the version which is required for launch, because of which we were getting an error. So we will configure this, we'll create plus, and we'll get an options to choose the versions. So by default, we choose the latest version. But if you think that the latest version does not have anything which you needed, maybe you want to go backtrack and use the previous versions, which might be supporting something which new version is not, then in those cases, you would go to a previous version. Otherwise, the recommendation is that you go with always the latest version. So you choose the version. This would enable, this will remove your required error, the error that you are getting. So this is, you have chosen your version. Now this is choosing your output format. By default is XML, but if you want to make a change, you can change it to something else, which is CSV supported other than XML. If you don't choose anything, then it will be by default XML. If you want to include inactive workers in the full file, so in the full file, by default, all the inactive workers, terminated workers are not included. So this connector supports full file and delta file as well. So it will come in the launch parameters in your, when you run the integration, whether you want to run your integration in full file mode or in the delta mode. So when you are running the integration in the full file mode, by default, your inactive workers will not be coming in your output. So let's say if you're checking the report for any terminated workers and that is not coming in the file, or any only worker is not coming in the file, that means you have not checked this checkbox. So if you want your inactive workers to be there in your file, you can check this checkbox. So then your inactive workers will also, by default, if you don't do anything, it will not include your inactive workers. What is the name type that you want to choose? By default is the legal preferred name that will be represented by this, your field attributes. But if you want to make a change, if you want to include any other names as well, you can do that. Legal preferred other names. So this is kind of controlling how your data would be sent, not like exact fields. So in your address type field, if you want to by default send the work address, then this is the by default one. If instead of work address, you want to send the home address in your address fields, then you can make it, check this box and provide to check the button for home address as well. Then when you will actually configure the fields on the address level, you will be able to send, and accordingly, whatever you choose here, that kind of addresses will be sent. Address usage, billing, shipping, all those things are here. Include non-primary email addresses or not. What will your phone number format would be? What is the phone type, work or home? What is the email type that you want to be sent? Work or by default is work. If you want to send home email as part of the email, then you have to choose it here. Include private email address. Include prior values. So this connector, since this connector uses prior values concept to detect changes, so it kind of also allows you to it allows you to represent prior values in your integration. What is the prior value? That means just before the change happened to any worker, what was the prior value of any particular field that was holding? Let's say an email was changed within last 24 hours. And the last email was abc@gmail.com, and new email is xyz@gmail.com. So by default, the connectors and integrations give you the latest values, what is effective in nature. So the latest value would be XYZ. But if you also want the previous value to be reported in your file, like the prior value, so you can do that. By default, it is not. But if you want the prior values to be enabled in your change file, then you can check this checkbox. So if you check this checkbox, your prior values are as well for the change file, because not for the full file, because full file it does not make sense for the prior values. It only gives the latest values, whatever is there. But if your integration is running in the change delta mode, then if there is any change for a particular worker, so what value has been changed, you will be able to see the previous value as well in your file. So this is how you control your previous values. What type of organization you want to send, cost center, company, all those things. So there are some lot of files generated by this core connector. If you want to suppress those files, message audit files, you can do that. So there are a lot of attributes in here. They're quite descriptive in nature. You can go through them, understand it, what is it and what is not. Your document retention policy, by default, it is 30 days. But if you want to override it, you can check and make it 180 or whatever is your need. So this is how this integration kind of attributes in general controls what your integration would behave. Services kind of chooses the subscriptions, what all features you would be using on your integration. Attributes kind of are the control parameters which controls how your integration would behave, how your data might look alike, what could be included, excluded in your data, so many things. So once you have configured your integration attributes, you click OK, and integration attribute configuration is complete. So now our integration attributes, the overall integration architecture is defined. Now we will go to selection of the individual fields. So how do you do that? You go again to here. We will choose configure integration field attributes. So you click here. So now whatever the sections, the data sections that you have chosen will all be listed here. So for now, we have only chosen two data section, personal data section and status data section. So now you have two data sections. So first of all, by default is this. So we have an option here, which all the fields which are coming in your personal data section. There are around 74 items in this section. So whatever the fields you want from this section, you just include them in your output by doing this checkbox. If you want to include them all at once, you can do that. And then maybe you want to remove some, you can remove some. By default, rest everything will be checked. If you want to only select some, then you keep it unchecked. So if you want to send the name type, that is, what is the name type that is being, so let's say your legal name is being reported. So there will be a field called as name type, that what is this name that is coming in? Is it a legal name? It is a preferred name. So if you choose this field, it will also give you the name type. What is the type of this name it is? This is your actual name, that the first name. This is the middle name. This is the last name, secondary last name, title, social, a lot of fields on the name itself, local script, this script, that script. It is full legal name, your gender, your birth date. So all the sections in your personal data section, which is coming here. So other than choosing the fields, so address and everything is here in your personal data section. This is your email data, your email type, public or not. And this is the actual value of your email address. So some of the fields you will see here in the description, you will see this line. This field is mapped using the integration map called marital status. This field is mapped using the integration map called disability. So as I told you that Workday supports a facility called as integration map service. What this map service does is that the values defined in Workday might not be relevant to the third systems where you are sending this data over. They might need the value to be represented in some other ways. So if they want to call male as M or female as F, LGBT as LG, or others as OT, then some of the fields are supported by Workday for the integration mapping, wherein you do not have to create a custom logic. If this mapping service is just kind of, it can just have an alternate given to you so that you don't have to create your overrides. You don't have to create the same calculation using the calculated field by creating an eval field and then kind of creating a condition. If the value is, if the gender is male, then in the text constant send as M. If the marital status is female, marital status is married USA, send M USA. So to avoid all those kinds of things so that you don't use the override fields unnecessarily, Workday has already given you a mapping service. So whatever the fields which are available by default by Workday mapping, you can take use of it and configure accordingly. So we have choose one of the fields such like gender, and we will do that mapping. Everything that you need in here which supports the mapping will be written here. So if that field supports the mapping, you can choose that. If you don't configure, let's say I am only using gender field, so I'll choose gender, but it is not mandatory that I definitely have to configure this. If there is no requirement from my vendor for any additional values to be sent, then I'll just use this field normally And whatever the value is inside Workday for this gender field for any particular worker, that will be sent as is. But if I have a requirement to map it to something else, which as per the vendor requirements, then I will have the flexibility for the fields which are written as like this. This field is available for mapping. So you choose your fields here by going to different sections. You can set out the maximum length, or if there are any lot, let's say there's a business title field which is long enough. If the system cannot consume data beyond 20 characters, so you can put a limit to it, 20, 11, 10. So whatever the data beyond that number will be automatically trimmed by Workday and it will not be sent over. So you can do that. If some of the fields are required by other system and you want to put a check in Workday itself, that if some value is required by that system and some employees who are not having this value configured, so you will start getting an error for that worker in your integration that this field value is mandatory and which was not available for this worker. So this worker will not be included in the output. So you can send this required field as well.
Here. So
Yeah.
once we create all these fields, field attributes, and we run the integration, we get the output file, and the user says he does not want a middle name. So can we, is there a way that we can edit the field attributes and delete whatever is not needed?
Yeah, you can come here and uncheck.
Oh, just uncheck.
Just uncheck. And from the next time, this
maybe
field will
not
not
that scenario. I came across one of the scenario. Probably, yeah, it was not that easy as discussed, but maybe I'll just look back and ask the question.
Sure. So whatever field which is selected by you, first of all, only the field selected by you will be enabled in your output file.
So
and
these are all the defined fields for that specific template, right?
Yeah, for the get workers, the worker template, core connector worker, these are the fields which are supported by this core connector worker.
So if there is any other field other than mentioned, we have to create a calculated fields.
Correct. It has to be on the worker business object. Just
Worker,
like if you have
same as report.
Same as report, yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, got it. Yep.
So you choose your field as per your section. So, and something which is not there in your section, that means you are done with 2 sections that you have which configured and you did not find the field that you were looking for. Then you can save it, go back to your configure integration services, choose any different section which you think this might contain your data. Come again here in the field attributes, go to that particular section that you have chosen and see if that field is there. If you find your field, well and good. And whatever sections that you are not consuming any data, then it's better to uncheck them in the services section itself so that they will itself not populate here. So the status data section will give you the information like if the worker is active or not, what is the active status date, what is their hire date, original hire date, the reason for them to be hired. So there and so all about the statuses thing. Staffing event, what is the most recent staffing event, if it was a hire, a change job, or a termination, retirement date, first day. So all these which are kind of related with the status, we'll have these fields here. So I would like to have one more. So in here, if you see, I don't have a field. So I have a requirement to get a business title field. So if I go here, the no match is found. I don't have the business title field here. And of course, in the personal data section, I don't even think that it will be there. But if you are not sure, you are new, then you just go back and search. So I'm not able to find any field as business title, but I have a need to include the business title field, which is not available here. So for now, I'll just click OK and have these fields saved, whichever I have created. I'll go to my integration again. Please. Okay. So I'll go to my integration system. I'll come again, integration services. So I'm assuming that my business title will be there in my position data section. So I'll just go here and enable the position data section, and I will click OK. So now I'll go, my section is enabled. I'll go again, integration system, field attributes. So now I have my third section here. And then here I'll see I got my business title. This is what I wanted from here. So every section supports one or the other field mapping services. You can choose if you want. And then I'll click OK. So this is how you have chosen your field attributes which you require to be included in your output file. Now, I have some fields which are not supported by my delivered field section, and I need a calculated field to be there. So I have created an override service for that here. Now, how do I configure the calculated fields in my override service? Just below the field attribute section, you would have seen a configure and override field service. So you come here, configure integration field overrides. So your override will be supporting you with two things. One is for your eligibility criteria, define the eligibility service, because we have chosen I think it was mandatory. We have eligibility service, and then your override field override service. So it will come in the same section, override section. Your eligibility works as a filter for your integration. So by default, it is on worker. So whatever the calculated fields or any delivered condition you have for the eligibility criteria to your integration, that means this is the population decider of your integration. What needs to be included, what needs not to be included. So any calculated field that you have, you can, or any direct field that you have, you can call it here. That will be your eligibility. If you do not have any eligibility at all, then you can just type is true. And they just do is true, any true, whatever you want. That means everything is included just to have, because this is mandatory. So you can just define anything. Otherwise, if you have a genuine condition like only USA workers or location from a particular location hierarchy or a company hierarchy or belonging to a particular cost center, or with a mix of combinations as well, but only one field will be accepted here. So you may have, if you have lots of conditions, then you may have to create one calculated true false field, in which you might have multiple conditions, and then you can call that single field here. So whatever is the output of that particular field, yes or no, based on that your worker will be included or excluded. So this is your eligibility criteria. Then comes your field override service. So in your field override, the skeleton that I was telling about, whatever you have skeleton created, placeholder created for your overrides, will be coming here. So if you have one row created, it will be one row. If you have 2-3 rows created there in your override, then you would have that many rows here. So we had just one. So only one is available for me to configure. And here is when you will call your calculated field. So this is my manager's email field. I've called here as the calculated field. So you can create it first and then call it here. And you click OK. So this is my override service, which is configured here. So now once I'm done with my override service, now if there are any integration mappings which are available in my options which I have chosen. So I have chosen gender field, which is available for mapping. So how do you configure mapping? You go here and then you choose the configure integration maps. So here I have selected a field called gender, which I can map here. So you see gender along with the other fields. So it just works as your evaluate expression field, which has a default value and then which has a internal and external value. So internal values will be able to, you will be able to choose from Workday. You will just create a plus against it and you'll just choose a value. So if you're expecting that there are, so the thing about this field is that you will have to either you have to configure each and every internal value which is supported by Workday for this field, and then the respective external value what you want it to be represented. If you don't want to configure every value, yeah.
Sorry. So for every field, we have to map, right?
Every field's value or every field?
Every field.
So whatever field you have chosen to be mapped, not to be mapped, that let's say I have a gender field I have chosen in my integration field attributes. Now, if I want that gender field to be configured for mapping, I can come here and configure. Let's say I have chosen that field, but I don't want any mapping. So by default, whatever the value is there in Workday, it will be sent as is over to the output file.
So what? I think I'm little confused. Why do we map?
We map because if the other system wants to receive this value in some other way, if they don't want to call it as male, they just want to receive in their system as M, because this is how they are consuming these values.
I got it. Okay. Because the reason I'm asking is when we create calculated fields, I'm just thinking, how do we map?
So if you're creating a calculated field, let's say, and you have 10 values for a gender, and let's say you're using an EIB. You don't have a core connector, and now your vendor is saying that I want the gender value to be represented for male as M, and for female as F, and for LGBT as LG, and for others as OT. So how will you achieve that? So you'll have to create a calculated field. Then you will create conditions, gender equal to male, and then in the return value, you will create a text constant called as M. Then you will create another condition, female gender as female. If that is true, send it as F. Similarly, that many conditions you have to create that many conditions in your evaluate field, have a return value assigned against it as a text constant. And then there is a default value that if there is some value which is not configured in your condition, then what it should do in the default cases. So exactly the same way, which is kind of a delivered way, configurable way, kind of a replacement for your evaluate calc field that you can do here.
Okay, got it.
If this is not there in your integration, then you, in the core connector, you might have to create more override fields, which are, you have to do a custom mapping using your evaluate expression calc field. So it's kind of an exact replacement of that. So whatever values, internal values you have, you will have to configure them. Or let's say there are 4 values. And right now you only see, let's say 2 values, female or male. And these male or female, and other 2 are not available. So anything which is not configured using the mapping, and you also don't have a default value associated for that, then your integration will start throwing any error for that particular worker who has a value which is not internally mapped by you, and there is no also default value assigned. So it's like that condition has occurred, but you have not handled that condition. So if you have a default value, it will by default go to that default value. If let's say you only configured male and female, and let's say there is a third gender which came in, which you have not configured and handled in the internal value, and maybe at that time only 2 values were there, but later on your inclusion and diversity team kind of added a couple more gender fields which you have not configured and catered for your integration, and your integration may have started failing because those workers who are belonging to those categories are not handled in here, and their output is not being sent. So it's a legitimate condition which might fail. So whatever the values which you have at that point of time, you just configure them and have an output value configured with a default name that you should agree with your vendor, that what if a person is belonging to the other, let's say new value gets added in Workday which we have not catered for, then what should be the default that we send. Although whenever there's a value and later on you want to come and configure it, you can always configure it. So the default should be always your last resort. so that at least your integration will not fail for any workers belonging to that category which is not mapped. So you just configure it here. You call it whatever you want. You can call it a text constant or whatever you want. Then you keep on adding that many rows that you want to handle the internal values and keep on mapping. So I have just handled 2, and if anything is there, I'll just want to call it as others. So in that case, if you have a default value, your integration will never fail, because for other values, it will just directly represent it by OT or whatever your default value is. This is the benefit of your the field mapping service. These are all the fields which are available for mapping if you want to utilize them. So now you have your mapping service defined here. You can also see in the view mode your mappings which you have here in the view mode, anything configured or not configured. Similarly for your integration attributes. Sequence generator that we have already used in here. You can just come here and configure integration sequence generator. And the same thing that you did there, exactly same thing you have to do here. Same thing. It is just that it is inbuilt and that was not inbuilt. But you have to choose for the integration sequence generator service in here. So we will configure the integration service. I think we have already done it, but we'll do it in the next part where we have something called as document transformation. So we will configure it because our final output file will be coming from there. So for now, I'll just uncheck this. Okay, so I'll probably, since I do not have the integration service, I'll probably have to go to field attributes and I will create a default output file name for my integration. Okay, this will be my default file name, and that is it.